Hey guys, it's Bree here at Blossom and Branch Farm, and today I'm coming at you from the sheep enclosure to talk about wool in the garden, how we're using it, why we're using it, and some things that you might want to know and you might want to try. So we'll start with introductions. This is Midnight and Roosevelt. These are our resident sheep. Apparently he's going to show you his butt for the remainder of this video. We got the sheep about a year and a half ago, and these are Southdown baby dolls. We got Southdown specifically because they have good personalities, they are friendly, they tend to be mild-mannered, and they are smaller. So they are a smaller breed sheep, and that is important for us because we are a small farm. We don't have acres and acres. We are under 2 acres, and so we wanted to make sure that we were not overwhelming our land with large animals. So these sheep are pretty small, and they're also pretty friendly. We really got them to help us eat down our cover crop and also to help us manage some of our invasive grasses that we have here on the property by grazing them down. But we found that they have another benefit, and that's what I'm here to talk about today, which is their wool. As you can see, these guys put on lots and lots of wool, and Southdown baby dolls have very nice wool. Actually, it's very soft. It's kind of considered the cashmere of wool. Not only is it very soft, it's very thick as well. Part of good sheep ownership is shearing. So every spring, these guys get sheared. Usually around May is when we shear them. That's part of good animal husbandry. Sheep have actually evolved to require shearing over time. As humans sheared them and used them over thousands of years for wool production for fabric, they have evolved to need it. Especially here in my climate, we reach 100 degrees in the summertime. So with that comes, what are we going to do with this wool that we have been shearing? So we looked into it last year and we found wool pellets. Now, wool pellets are when they take basically the second cuttings of the sheep, which is kind of this stuff here underneath. Come here, Roosevelt. So you can see here underneath, on the top they have this nice long wool. Underneath, kind of on their bellies and on their backs and underneath their arms, they have this shorter wool, which we would call the seconds. So any secondary pieces of shearing, or just the shorter bits or bits that have poop in them, so often their backsides get covered with manure and it just becomes very difficult to clean. And so those bits get turned into wool pellets. And we have some here to show you. This is where we started sourcing it last year, was this company called Wild Valley Farms. And they're actually pelletizing our wool for us this year so that we can use our own wool in our seed starting. But this is where we were sourcing it last year. We hadn't sheared our sheep last year yet when it was time for seed starting. And this is what they look like. So just little tiny pellets, and some of them you can even see little bits of poop. Again, because these are seconds, this is often not the best wool that they're using to make these pellets. A lot of times this would otherwise get discarded in the trash. So why are these wool pellets good to use? Well, one is that wool is really good at retaining water. So it can retain up to 20 times its weight in water. And if you've ever had a wet wool sweater, you know this, because when it's wet, they are very, very heavy. That's because wool holds a lot of water. It's also why our sheep don't like to get wet and why we have to have them in a barn, because if they get wet, they take a very long time to dry out. This is good for us when we're soil blocking. If you haven't already watched our videos about soil blocking, I'd encourage you to go back and look at those, because it talks about why we soil block and the benefits of soil blocking over starting in a plastic seed tray. Not only are we cutting our plastic use, it's better for the health of the plants, which means healthier, more pest resistant and drought resistant plants down the road into the gardening season. So not only is wool good at retaining water, which is good for seed starting, particularly soil blocking, because it helps keep our soil blocks from drying out as quickly, it also is a slow release nitrogen. So wool will continue to release nitrogen for up to 6 months, and the wool pellets themselves are in 902 on the NPK. If you watched our last video about composting, you know that we are concerned here in our garden about phosphorus, and because we've used no-dig methods in the past, we've relied heavily on compost, we now have a high phosphorus level in our soil, and so we're trying to avoid using anything that has phosphorus, and wool pellets fit that bill. They have a 9 on the nitrogen but 0 on the phosphorus. So by putting that nitrogen into our seed starting soil at the beginning of the season, I know sometimes people will say, no, you have to have this sterile seed starting soil with no nutrients in it. That's just not true. And it's really not what we've found here at the farm. Usually we will enrich our seed starting soil, and we actually use a sifted potting soil as the basis of our seed starting mix. We usually use Fox Farms Coco Loco because it's peat free. The other way that this all came about was that we stopped using peat. So we have not used peat here at the farm for 5 years. Boys, could you go over here? Peat bogs are one of our most important carbon sinks. That is, they store a lot of carbon from the atmosphere. When we harvest peat to use in potting soils and in garden soils, it releases a lot of carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, and it also decimates ecosystems. So peat bogs are very important ecosystems, and it's an important habitat. And when we start harvesting peat bogs, it takes thousands of years for them to return to what they were previously. It's really not a sustainable practice when we stand back and look at it. So knowing all of this is why we started using the peat-free potting soil. Now, what we need to do with soil blocking is figure out a binder. So we used to use coconut coir, and I do still use that one occasionally. Coconut coir is a better alternative than peat because it's a byproduct. We're not going in and harvesting coconuts or cutting down coconut trees just because we need coconut coir. Coconut coir is a byproduct of using coconut for meat, coconut milk, so it's something that would otherwise be landfilled. But there is still a shipping requirement. So to get coconut coir to me in Colorado means it has to come thousands of miles. So it's still not the best option. So I would rather use something that I have close by to me. So wool pellets are a great option. In our soil blocking recipe, the coconut coir usually serves as the binder. So our soil can be pretty loose, and when we're using soil blocks, there's no container to hold them in. We're just relying on the soil structure. So this is where the coconut coir has come in handy, is it's used as a binder. We experimented with seed starting with the wool instead of the coconut coir as the binder in our soil blocks last spring, and it worked so well. You can go and watch, we have a video on our channel of different seed starting soils. I think we tested Miracle Grow, Black Gold, our seed starting mix, and one more I can't remember offhand. Oh, Jiffy. And the one with the wool outperformed them all, even outperformed our own coconut coir mix. And that's probably because of that nitrogen that exists, that slow release nitrogen. So it's not going to burn the seedlings, but it is a slow release, so it's available for the seedlings when they need it. You can also just mix the wool pellets directly into your soil. And while I've never done this because we have a lot of garden beds, we just have too much for it to be economically feasible, you can do that. So this 8-ounce bag covers about 15 square feet. So it's going to help with water retention, and it's going to fertilize your plants. But much like we were talking about in our compost video last week, nitrogen and really all amendments are the most helpful when they're directly in the rhizosphere area of the plant. So if we're sprinkling wool pellets around, but they're really not in contact with our plant rhizosphere or root area, they're not going to do a whole lot of good, at least in the short term. Instead, what we want to do is focus it into the root area. So using wool pellets to start our seeds in helps with that mission. So we can use less if we use it in seed starting versus applying it to our garden soil, but we can do either. And this will cover about 15 square feet. So you need about a pound of wool to cover an 8-by-4 foot raised bed, rough. What we're experimenting with right now, and I will keep you all updated on this, is different ratios of wool, because what we did find a little bit last year was because of the water retention and because of the nutrients in this one, the wool recipe that we used, in some cases it was too many nutrients and too much water retention for some of the plants that we grow. For example, our drought resistant natives like Echinacea didn't really love this mix because it was too wet and too rich. And I think it was really more than we needed. So we're experimenting with making it more economically feasible to use these wool pellets by using less. And I really think that that is going to be efficient, to use less of these and to figure out the correct ratio of wool pellets to the soil. So we'll keep you guys posted with how those experiments are coming along. And in the meantime, if you don't have your own sheep to pelletize some wool, you can grab these. We'll link them below. This is from Wild Valley Farms. This is from Wild Valley Farm in Utah. Now, if you decide to use sheep wool pellets in your seed starting mix, the one disclaimer I will give you is that for about a week, it smells like a wet, dirty sweater. So wool, you know that smell when wool gets wet, it smells like that, but also there's manure in there. So because we talked about that it comes from the seconds of the animal and there can often be manure stuck in that wool, They don't clean it out before they make it, and that's why it's also a good source of nitrogen. But because of that, it does have an odor, and especially when we wet it, it can be quite odoriferous. So be aware of that. For the first week, it will smell. And then after that, that smell does fade away. It won't smell anymore, but just know that when you first mix it up, it can be a little bit scented. All right, guys, I hope you liked this video. I hope you learned something. I had brought a cup of tea in here, but now it is full of straw. So that was a choice. I hope everyone has a wonderful weekend, and let me know if you have any questions about sheep wool in the garden or if you've tried it before. I'd love to hear it. See you guys soon.